Welcome to Session 2 of Module 2. We will review assessment tasks that constitute an ICASS. Session 2 is about assessment tasks constituting the ICASS mark in Report 191 programs. Assessment tasks constituting the ICASS mark in NCV programs. Allocation of time and marks. We'll begin by looking at what types of assessment tasks make up the ICASS mark. Ask yourself if you know the specific requirements for your subject. You should complete Activity 2 now. Please pause the video now. It is important to be able to distinguish between Report 191 programs, which are trimester and semester programs, and NCV programs, so let us quickly have a look at both of these types of programs. We will discuss Report 191 programs first. Report 191 programs have internal assessments consisting of tasks that include tests, assignments, and internal examinations. The marks from these internal assessments are used for the semester and trimester marks. A student needs to obtain a minimum of 40% in the internal assessments in order to be admitted to the examination. All internal assessments that are used to make up the final ICASS mark must meet with the pre- and post-assessment moderation requirements that are set out in the ICASS guidelines. You should make a note that in the trimester subjects of engineering studies, only tests are written, whereas in business and utilities studies, both of which are semester subjects, one written test, one assignment, and an examination must be completed. Let's take a look at the types of assessments and the weighted values of each type of assessment. It is extremely important to keep the weighted values of topics and modules in your syllabus, as well as the weighted values of assessments. Notice that Test 1 must align with the external exam paper. For example, if the examination paper counts for 100 marks for 3 hours, then the test should count 30 to 35 marks for an hour duration. Remember that this is a guideline only, and that at least the first 30% of the syllabus content should be covered in Test 1. Notice also that Test 2 should align with the external exam paper in the same way. At least 75 to 80% of the syllabus content must be covered in Test 2. It is very important to remember that ICASS marks are valid for 3 examinations that may not necessarily be taken consecutively. Therefore, make sure that all assessment evidence is kept available during this period. This is in case queries arise or further external moderation processes need to be conducted. Now let's have a look at how the ICASS marks for business and utilities studies are made up. Remember that you can refer to Annexure S3 of the ICASS guidelines for Report 191 program templates. You'll notice that for both business and utilities studies, there must be a practical task with a minimum of 100 marks. This task should cover at least 80% of the practical component of the subject. As with engineering studies, the written test for these subjects must align with the external exam paper. For example, if the examination paper counts 100 marks for 3 hours, then the test should count 30 to 35 marks for 1 hour duration. Again, this is just a guideline to be used for time allocation. The test should count out of more marks. At least 50% of the syllabus content must be covered in this written test. The duration and marks of the internal examination should also align with the external exam paper, and at least 70 to 80% of the syllabus content must be covered in the internal examination. It is important to remember that the ICASS mark is valid for 2 consecutive years, thus for 4 consecutive examinations. This means that you must keep all assessment evidence available during this period, in case queries arise or further external moderation processes need to be conducted. Now let's take a look at the ICASS mark for NCV programs. You will notice that the ICASS components for NCV programs are more comprehensive than for Report 191 programs. You need to be aware that a clear distinction must be made between fundamental and vocational subjects, because this determines the route to be followed. Fundamental subjects are first additional language, life orientation, mathematics, and mathematics literacy. In order to receive a complete subject result for fundamental subjects, a student needs both an ICASS and an examination mark. These marks are compulsory. You can refer to the ICASS templates in ICASS for NCV qualifications. The templates have columns that make provision for the task, the time frame, the assessment activity, scope of assessment, and the suggested mark allocation. The layout for each subject is very clear, so we'll not discuss them. NCV policy states that a sub-minimum for both internal and external assessments must be achieved. This relates to both the ICASS and ISAT components. A 40% pass must be achieved in life orientation and the first languages. A 30% pass must be achieved in mathematics and mathematical literacy. What do we mean by vocational subjects? When we talk about vocational subjects, we're referring to all the other subjects taken by a student, excluding the fundamental core subjects already mentioned. For a vocational subject to be passed, the student must obtain marks in all three separate components: the ICASS, the ISAT, and the examination. Look at the ICASS templates for NCV qualifications in Annexure D. You will notice that provision is made on the template for the task, the time frame, the type of assessment or activity, the time and proposed mark allocation, and the scope of the assessment. The time and mark allocation are important, as we've already discussed. It is important to note that Pat 1 and Pat 2 are compulsory elements of the ICASS. Do not confuse the weightings of topics in the subject guidelines with the percentage contribution to the year mark. You should also take note of the fact that the NCV policy requires an achievement of a sub-minimum for both internal and external assessments, and this relates to both the ICASS and ISAT components. The required achievement percentages for all vocational subjects is 50%. Now that we have had a look at how the assessments of NCV fundamental and vocational subjects are determined, we need to pay attention to a few general points that apply to both NCV fundamental and vocational subjects. Firstly, remember that the candidate must achieve the sub-minimum in both the external and internal assessment components. Also, both the external and internal components must be completed in the same academic year. Secondly, the ISAT mark remains valid for a period of 3 years, allowing the candidate time to complete a qualification. The ICASS mark is valid up to the first supplementary examination immediately following the November examination. However, an ICASS mark cannot be transferred to the next academic year. Notice that the two practical assessment tasks forming part of the ICASS for vocational subjects have now been standardized for levels 3 and 4. This is to ensure a uniform standard across institutions. These tasks are moderated both internally and externally. Fourthly, additional assessments, which are often referred to as reassessments, may not be used simply to allow students to achieve higher scores after performing poorly in a task the first time. Notice also that an additional opportunity to complete a task may be granted to a student who is absent for valid or special reasons such as illness or death in the immediate family. Finally, all assessment evidence must be kept available in case queries arise or further external moderation processes be conducted. This is the end of Session 2 of Module 2. we looked at what assessment tasks constitute the ICASS mark in both Report 191 and NCV programs, including the allocation of time and marks.